Good evening. In the final days of campaigning for the mayoral election, the current mayor, Sadiq Khan, has been appealing to voters nostalgic for a summer like London 2012. If elected, Mr Khan says he'll explore the possibility of bringing the Olympics and Paralympics back to the capital. The government, though, say it's not something they're even considering. And his rivals say there are far more pressing issues facing London. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
In the red corner, Labour's Sadiq Khan. In the blue corner, Conservative Sean Bailey. Today, the two challengers were both in boxing rings as the mayor announced what he hopes will be a vote winner.
If I'm re-elected, I'll be setting up a committee to explore whether we can bring back the Olympics to London.
Far be it from me to accuse Sadiq Khan of an election stunt, but this does feel like one.
A sequel to the glorious summer of 2012 is by no means certain. At this stage, the mayor is promising only to set up an exploratory committee to consider another London bid for the Games.
I've seen the difference that Olympics can make, but this would be one that's sustainable both in terms of finances and the
environment. Is this an election gimmick?
Well, no, we know the IOC have said, the International Olympics Committee, it wouldn't be too soon for London to get it again in 2036 or 2040.
Everybody loves the Olympics, but I think Sadiq Khan can't get the Olympics back for two reasons. One, we have too much crime. He spent 5 years ignoring our biggest problem, and that will probably stop him getting the Olympics. And of course, he doesn't have the power to do this. What's so frustrating about Sadiq Khan, he spent 5 years concentrating on things he cannot deliver.
It cost taxpayers £9.3 billion to build the 2012 Olympic venues. Londoners faced an additional surcharge. Since then, the stadium and aquatic centre have shrunk. That downsizing would have to be reversed. One of the biggest challenges would be finding somewhere for the competitors and their coaching staff to stay. During the 2012 Games, the purpose-built Athletes' Village was home to more than 10,000 people. But it's no longer available. Almost 3,000 families now live in the flats. Other parts of the Olympic Park have been built upon.
We all loved London in 2012. I think it showed the best of our city. It was an absolutely amazing place to be that year when we hosted the Olympics. But rather than talking about lofty plans for the future, I think we should be focusing on the current mayor's actual record. And in 5 years, he's just not done very much.
I think it is completely right that London does bid for the Olympics every few decades, and that would be the timing he's talking about is about right, I think. But my plans for a real recovery in London aren't just about single events, they're about genuinely transforming our economy. I've announced, for example, trying to close City Airport, redevelop that whole quarter of our city.
Sadiq Khan's Olympic dream would need the backing of the government, but one minister dismissed it, saying the government wasn't considering an Olympic bid and was focused on dealing with COVID.
So, Simon, is this even a possibility?
Well, it's certainly an interesting announcement 48 hours before election day, but we know from the last bid there are huge hurdles to overcome. Government backing and government money are just two of them. In the past, the IOC has been keen to encourage bids from parts of the world which have never hosted the Olympics. So would it seriously consider a fourth London Olympics so soon after 2012? And anyway, a decision on who gets the 2036 Games could be 7 years away. Who knows who'll be London Mayor by then.
OK, Simon, thank you. Well, later on in the programme, we will hear from 4 more candidates standing to be mayor. This is the full list of all 20 that are in the running. It's also on our website. Just search for ITV London.
Good evening. How the next mayor will tackle knife crime is the key issue of concern for voters ahead of tomorrow's mayoral election. In a new poll by Opinion for the Evening Standard, 52% of respondents said it was their top priority. Just last night, a 21-year-old man was stabbed to death at a busy shopping centre in Brent Cross. There have been 10 murders in London since this election campaign began, and the main candidates are under pressure to prove how they would stop the violence. More from Brent Cross in a moment. But first, our political correspondent Simon Harris reports on the final day of campaigning.
Sadiq Khan wants to focus on making sure London bounces back from COVID. But as he met voters in Leighton on a final walkabout, a new opinion poll suggested they care more about knife crime. Are you ashamed of the number of murders in London?
I'm heartbroken whenever I hear about a
Is it your Achilles heel?
I think the reality is that Londoners losing their lives. This is not party politics. I've never used violent crime as a political football. My opponents might want to do so. This is far more serious than party politics.
There was no razzle-dazzle as Sean Bailey embarked on his last day of the campaign, just a meeting in Kennington with the vaccine minister, who's obviously a fan.
This man is a force of nature.
The Tory candidate has put dealing with knife crime at the forefront of his election manifesto. Could you have done any better as mayor?
Sadiq Khan's whole approach to crime from the very beginning made me know he was going to fail. He took away £38 million from the police staffing budget. He told us it would take 10 years to solve youth crime. So yes, I can tell you I would have done better.
So far this year, 34 Londoners have lost their lives to violence. 12 of them were teenagers, and 10 of them have died since the start of the election campaign in March. Opinion polls throughout the campaign have consistently given Sadiq Khan a healthy lead over Sean Bailey. While the gap has narrowed in recent weeks, Labour looks almost certain to hang on to City Hall. Frustratingly for the other main parties, poll after poll has shown them trailing the two front-runners by a wide margin.
Hello.
Today, the Lib Dems and the Greens were talking up their chances. They shared the same priority.
Scrap the Silvertown Tunnel. It's a polluting £2 billion project that the Mayor is going ahead with, even though it will make our poor air quality in London worse. One of my top priorities is to clean up our air. The last thing we need is a new motorway.
If you were elected mayor, what would be the first thing you'd do?
I would first of all cancel the Silvertown Road Tunnel. That project should have been cancelled by the current mayor long ago. Building new roads in the middle of a climate crisis when we've got an air pollution crisis as well just doesn't make any sense.
Thanks to lockdown restrictions, even though they've been eased, this has felt like a very low-key campaign. It's been unlike any previous election to choose a London mayor. The candidates can only hope the voters have been listening.
So, Simon, is voter concern about violent crime going to have an effect on the outcome of the mayoral vote, do you think?
What is clear is that in recent weeks, the opinion polls have shown that knife crime is growing as a concern among voters, and that might be because of the recent murders. It might be because the messages from the candidates are beginning to resonate. But whatever the reason, knife crime has overtaken affordable housing, health, and even COVID recovery as a voter concern. It's still worth pointing out, of course, that the most recent opinion poll yesterday shows that Sadiq Khan has a 12-point lead over his rival.
OK, Simon, many thanks. Well, here is the full list of everyone who is standing to be Mayor of London tomorrow. 20 candidates in total, and it's also on our website. To the mayoral election now, and although the vote won't be announced until the results of the votes, I should say, won't be announced until tomorrow or as late as Sunday, early indications are that this could be a much closer contest than the polls had suggested. It is a two-horse race between Labour's Sadiq Khan and Conservative Sean Bailey. Our political correspondent Simon Harris is at City Hall. Simon.
Geraint, we're still waiting for the first result from a London Assembly constituency ballot. That should give us some idea of yesterday's turnout and how the political parties are performing so far. It's not an accurate guide to whether Sadiq Khan or Sean Bailey will be London's next mayor, because it's only a small slice of the total votes. But the electronic counting machines seem to suggest that there's a much smaller gap between the two frontrunners than expected. The opinion polls predicted a comfortable win for Sadiq Khan, but as counting got underway, it looked as if the race was much closer. Olympia was one of 3 election hubs where COVID security was the order of the day. Screens helped enforce social distancing. Ballot papers were handled with gloves, and there were half as many staff as usual.
We know that COVID restrictions are likely to mean that we'll be a little bit slower, but the important thing is that the count is undertaken safely, accurately, and we get the results in as timely a fashion as we're able to.
That timely fashion means it'll take at least 2 days. In this election, London is divided into 14 constituencies, each one represented by a member of the London Assembly. Today, ballot papers from 7 of them were being counted. The other half will be done tomorrow. Labour sources nervously reported a low turnout at some polling stations yesterday, which could favour the Conservatives.
From initial figures, turnout I think will be lower than 2016, which is worrying because generally we do find that across London anyway, that turnout can sometimes have an impact on Labour voters, but Throughout the day, we saw steady but slow turnout.
People used to talk about the donut in London, so central London tends to be very heavily Labour and outer London is much more Conservative, and I think broadly speaking that still holds. But in a low turnout election, which the mayoral election invariably is, it's rare to get anywhere near 50% people turning out. That makes the result more unpredictable.
Tonight, Labour hopes of Sadiq Khan winning an outright majority in the first round were fading. Second preference votes will now be crucial.
All the evidence as of this moment is Sadiq Khan is still likely to win. He was well ahead in the polls. The polls have not been wrong ever before. And from what voting figures we can see up to this minute, it looks as if the Labour vote is still coming out in broadly numbers it did before, perhaps the Conservatives similarly.
Vote counting in City Hall elections has a troubled history. Technical hitches and delays are not unusual. Add COVID to this one, and the final result won't be before tomorrow at the earliest. Simon Harris, ITV News.
Well, let's return now to our political correspondent, Simon Harris, who is still at City Hall. Simon, what's the latest?
Geraint, at one point in this election, it looked as if Sadiq Khan would win an outright majority without second preference votes being taken into account. But tonight, that Labour dream appears to be fading. The gap between the current mayor and Sean Bailey has narrowed. It looks as if they're very much closer than expected. So almost certainly this will go to a second round with second preference votes being considered. The counting is, of course, slow because of COVID, which means we won't get a final result in the mayoral election or indeed know the makeup of the London Assembly until tomorrow evening at the earliest.
Simon, many thanks.
Now the main stories in the capital, and Londoners are still waiting to find out who the city's mayor will be. Labour candidate Sadiq Khan is currently 5 points ahead of Conservative rival Sean Bailey. Whoever wins the race will have questions to answer on how they'll deal with violent crime, as our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
Less than 24 hours after the polls closed, London's violent crime epidemic claimed another life. A teenage boy was stabbed to death in a fight at Harold Wood in East London. The bloodshed didn't end there. This morning, a man in his 30s was shot dead in Dalston. Opinion polls in the run-up to the election suggested Londoners think whoever wins should treat violent crime as the #1 priority.
Sadiq Khan has grasped the issue. He's putting in more money both into policing but also in tackling the causes of crime and crime prevention. He's put his money where his mouth is.
Voters seem to think he should do more.
Well, I think the question is we need to actually explain a little bit more what we're doing. The issues of crime and violent crime are complex.
Sadiq Khan was still waiting to find out if Londoners have elected him for a second term. Ballot papers were being counted at 3 election hubs. This was Excel. The overnight tally of votes from the electronic counting machines revealed a much tighter contest than expected between the Labour mayor and his Conservative rival, Sean Bailey.
It is very close, and I can see Sean might be able to nick it on the second round. Khan was saying that he was going to win it on the first round. Well, he's been once again shown to be a fool.
The winner won't be declared until the final result from the last 7 London Assembly constituency ballots have been announced. The first of those today, Greenwich and Lewisham, came after more than 10 hours of counting.
Lendeval, Labour and Cooperative Party, 82,048%.
In a bizarre turn of events, the Burning Pink Party claimed its mayoral candidate Valerie Brown had been arrested on suspicion of conspiring to cause criminal damage. It came after a man sprayed pink paint on the glass windows of the offices of the Guardian newspaper in King's Cross. A handful of Brown supporters protested outside Islington Police Station. Police confirmed a woman in her 60s was in custody.
So, Simon, the race for mayor is still not over. What's the latest on when we'll get a result?
Well, Romilly, the latest from officials here is that a winner will be announced tonight sometime after 8:30. There appears to be a 3% or so swing to the Conservatives, but it looks as if Sadiq Khan has enough of a lead to clinch it, although only after second preference votes have been taken into account. The counting process is slow because of social distancing, so the candidates might have a long wait for the result.
Simon, thanks for that.
Good evening, I'm Faye Barker. This is ITV News London. Well, it was closer than expected, but late last night it was confirmed that Sadiq Khan has secured his second term as London Mayor. His Conservative rival Sean Bailey wasn't far behind, and Green Party candidate Sian Berry was third. Well, Sadiq Khan has now pledged to build a better and brighter future for the capital following the pandemic. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
Social distancing left the candidates looking like contestants in a scary game show. But this was the only way they could stand together in City Hall's chamber late last night to hear the result.
I therefore declare Sadiq Aman Khan elected as the Mayor of London.
Sadiq Khan said he was humbled by the result and he wanted to reset his relationship with Downing Street by
building bridges between City Hall and the government. Because we must all work together to build a brighter, greener and more equal future for London and for our entire country after the pandemic.
When first preference votes were counted, Sadiq Khan was on 40%, Sean Bailey not far behind on 35%, Sian Berry for the Greens on almost 8%, and the Liberal Democrats' Louisa Porritt got just over 4%. In the second round, the vote split was 55 to 45%. Sadiq Khan's winning majority of 228,000 was smaller than the 300,000 plus majority in 2016. This was a much closer race than everyone predicted.
It was, and I'm just so humbled by the amount of support Londoners gave me. Look, if I was given an extra month or so, I probably could have won.
For 16 of the 20 candidates, the election had an added cost. They all lost their £10,000 deposit after failing to get enough votes. One of Sadiq Khan's first jobs is to hire a new top team after 4 of his most senior aides announced they were leaving City Hall. It's also all change at the London Assembly. Almost half of the Assembly members are new. Labour is the largest group with 11 seats, enough to ensure the Mayor's policies aren't blocked by opposition parties. But the Conservatives aren't planning to let Mr Khan enjoy any kind of honeymoon.
He needs to get a grip of what he's responsible for, not spend millions of pounds removing our statues. He needs to be concentrating on what he's put in there to do.
Veteran Assembly member Caroline Pidgeon is no longer a lone Liberal Democrat voice.
We've doubled the number of people at City Hall, and what that means is we're going to be pushing for jobs, clean air and homes in London, and we'll be pushing this Mayor to make sure he keeps to his promises.
The Greens had a good election, winning 3 seats and coming third in the mayoral race. Will you stand again?
We have about 3 years until the next election. I have 18 months to decide on that question, so watch this space.
Tomorrow, Sadiq Khan will be sworn in as Mayor for the next 3 years. Simon Harris, ITV News, City Hall.